So this image is not compulsory, but it's from a quick material collection that that I brought as potential sources for play. But there's others. We can use other material, even something else than images, certainly. But images are easy. But so this playtest is a kind of like a draft of like, let's say, nudging imagination forward of what could be done with this, let's say, the idea of cards that we were mostly talking about last time. And it doesn't have to have like a strict adherence to how they were talked about last time, but one can approach them freely. But to kind of, let's say, push it a bit to kind of think expansively around them, I made some moves. And this set of moves is drafty and sketchy. We can change it as we go along, and I don't think it's damage if we change it. But if we start from this idea that, okay, let's actually pick a card that we sort of used. This one, for example. So if this card had, like last time, this idea that it could have this practice, ritual, rule connected to it, which is that you're, when you face this card, you play it as looking for a spot in the environment and see then how that turns into a web that essentially casts an environment in a certain way. For example, yes, this direction. Like when I played this card with this rule, I immediately saw a light right next to me. And then that was kind of focusing the environment, but it also created this idea is how a light, by setting things that you see to be the things that you see, which you wouldn't see if you didn't have a light, it made a web, like a spider catches to its web things. This catches the environment to be what it is, which then led to, in a way, the card creating a card. But all of that was essentially born out of like adding this practice to this card. But if you think of that idea, of course, that, well, let's make another memory example. The other one, as an example, was this, a text. But then how the rule connected to this card was, whenever you get this card, you rewrite this text with changing the wordings, like and the new text created is kind of a card in itself, and therefore the card becomes a generator of like a continued branch of text, which is almost like a fiction of its own, made by the rules of the text itself, but also the rules added to the card.
I think this, sorry to interrupt, but I think this part is super important of the nature of cards, that each card is both a rule or like a method or like a way of approaching something, an operation, let's say, like in this case, like generate a new text, or in the other one, do this web catching perspective change. And it's also iterations of that operation are also cards. And then they can coexist at different levels. They can feed back into each other. But just being pragmatic, I think it would be great to have cards that are the operations, and then have those operations also generate new cards as like
yes.
a things that cards, or that the modularity of cards allow for.
Yes, and it's I'll actually give you points for jumping in, because it's good that I don't just talk. But then to summarize this sort of very simple playtest, like if we then have material, which could be, say, this image or this or something else than an image, or this one, and we have these moves. Whenever we have some material, let's call it a source, like the image like this. Of course, it could be anything else, but now it could be this image, or anybody can make a move of expressing a rule. And the rule here is in the widest sense. Like it could be precisely like the rule with this one as this, I think I called it a point of capture, but then the rule is like find in your environment something that is a point of capture and then see what it captures. So that's one move. And you don't have to have that rule to be super precise. You can think of this to use XORG terms, in terms of shifts, that you can add a fragment, like you just have an idea, just you can make a rule that others have to add to. That's completely fine. But you can think of other moves. Like, for example, you could make a move of a deck where you could describe which kind of deck could this card be part of? And that can be also very fragmentary, impressionistic, partial. Or you could make a move of suit, of saying, say, this card is part of the suite of webs. And you don't necessarily have any wider idea of it, but that comes to your mind, and that also can be added to. But similarly, like you could have an idea of a constellation, like let's say that you have an idea that let's say this card, to use examples that we had, is played with this card. And what it means is you can pick other text, but you then find a point of capture in the text, like a keyword. And then you see how it sets other words, just to improvise an example. You can also make a move of switch, which is like, let's switch a card or a source that we have. And there can be other moves like title, which is that you want to just give it a name. This move list is really open. Like, I think there are probably better moves, but these are kind of the starting possibilities. But I think the key ones, yes, the rule, but then also the move of deck, suit, constellation, title.
Hand as well.
Hand, yes. And yes, we can add to the move list as it goes along. But all of them possibly, hopefully, open up how we think about the cards, and then open up the sort of possibilities of how do we play with this and how do we see them and what could come out of them. And that's
Can I quickly, sorry?
Yeah.
Can I quickly jump in here? Because like, you're recapping part of last week, right?
Yes.
So like side comment that I can make later, but like what this is rather condensed. Could we use this very moment and like write down these things that were just counted through, add things that come from the side, do it also in a shared fashion so that we can all see this, because it appears as if we're kind of now, reiterating certain things that we have so far now kind of adjacent attached with the cards. So that would be good, to somehow link down somewhere so that we can have that it doesn't just go through the kind of speech channel and then
Yes.
make a point of reference. That would be really nice. I don't know if somebody can maybe throw some Google Doc.
I can throw a Google Doc and also put it.
Access.
Yeah, like, because that's probably the easiest. Maybe I'll just throw it quickly. I'll stop the sharing for that because I have to jump between windows. But I'll just make a quick link.
Yeah, that can comment in the meantime. That would be great, especially now that we have renewed energy for the digital infrastructure tentacle, XORG and Tentacle that Martin and me will be working on. It will be, like, I'm remembering, Martin, you did this great web experiment with the cards already, where you would get like these random cards. If we could have a sort of like wiki database of cards, and then we can have a simple website where you draw cards from this database, and that's it. We can create recipes for games that you play with this very simple thing, just like database of cards, drawing cards, and we can add new cards, have games that create new cards, have games that relate cards in different ways. This could all be also games that we share in this same website. And just, yeah, I think the possibility of having digital cards or having digital as the material substrate for the cards is great, in the sense of we can link cards in the website, and it can run locally entirely, right? Like, you don't even need to connect different instances. Hey, Linda.
Hello.
But we could have, for example, people with two phones drawing different cards. Each one has a hand, revealing some of them. Like, it's such a nice medium to play with.
I'd be happy to. I think we might, because Pekko was still kind of, I think, in the kind of listing flow. I'd be happy to kind of come back to that, because many of the things that you kind of pointed to are already basically they're running. It's this, all the database is there, the making is there. But like, yeah. So the Google Doc is there also.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay.
The link is in the chat.
Yeah,
Yes,
the link is in
I'm
the
there.
chat. And I just threw into it example of the earlier card, and of course there was more to it than just the title, but I would kind of put the emphasis on making the moves and playing the new ones, because we might otherwise veer to just documenting last time. We can do that easily afterwards or during this play, but I think like playing around with these moves would be important, and once one makes a move, one can record it into the document.
Do you think we could maybe just what you now went through, write that in, so that we have that for reference?
It's a bit more than, like, it would take time now to write the whole thing, and then we probably use our time in that, and then once again we don't get to play. Because I can write it afterwards. But it's a simple thing. We take material, we can make a move of proposing, expressing a rule, expressing a deck, which the card could be part of, expressing a suit. And this can be a way to grow the idea of a single card. Like, we have an idea of a rule, and then we have an idea of a deck, and play that. And I encourage everyone to write the things that they make as moves, even as short versions, into the document. I will be slightly limited on this because I'm sharing my screen at the same time, so I can try to make notes on paper and write them afterwards. But for now, I will be limited. And Martin, sorry, there's still the background noise, so
I'm sorry.
it's okay. So first, maybe as not to enforce this particular image, I can scroll through some possibilities. And of course, if somebody has some other material to propose, that could be there. But anything that strikes your interest, do note as a starting point.
Oh, let's do that one, the one with the candies.
All
yes, yes.
All right. So we'll use this. And anybody who wants can make the first move. I will restrict myself from making the first move to encourage you to make one?
I would say that this image depicts the act of making a hand where each candy is a card.
Act of making a hand where each one is a card. That's a good one.
Yes, that's a very good one. I like that. And like the box is like the deck of cards.
That creates an impression. I'm not proposing this as a rule, but it is like I can see this way of playing where you're grasping from somewhere, maybe like a chest full of toys or whatever it is. And then whatever you pull from there with your grasp, that's your hand.
Is that now the rule attached to that card?
It's a rule. If somebody has another rule, I don't think it's a problem to propose others. Like, but you can also build upon that rule. Like, think about a title, or you can think about a suit, or yeah.
The rule is that you need to show. No, I'm making a proposition for a rule because I'm not sure that it's a good rule, but that you need to show the card through the box. So, like the guy who's gathering his hand here, he has to show, like, he has to play with it through the container.
Can you explain more? I didn't quite catch.
You don't get it out. Like, if you you propose the chest of toys, right? And you put your hands in and you grab your hand of toys. The continuation of the game, you don't take the hand out, but you have to go through the box.
Oh, so in a way, like you're playing through, like the hand with the hand in the box itself. Interesting.
Yes, exactly.
That rule has like some connotations towards, like if I think of it as an alternative rule, I mean, it could also be combined with what Pablo said, but now I think of it as an alternative. It's like maybe the rule, that the action that the card creates is that you have to sense something of without like taking it and looking at it, but letting it be in its place, and then use that as a way to understand it, interpret it, which is then could possibly be an activity that comes from the card itself.
I didn't totally get it in time to write it down. Can you repeat? I got that you sense it. But what else did you say?
Like when you get this card, the kind of rule of activity is that you sense something by taking it without moving it from its position, like putting your hand in a bag but not taking the thing out, or placing your hand on something on the desk, but rather than looking at it and taking it, it's like getting the interpretation by holding onto it.
Yeah, like a tactile interpretation of it.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, like the classic pattern of like you can feel something in a bag or a box, but that's the only thing you get. You don't take it out. But then that kind of made more flexible and general, like how I have a bunch of pens in my desk, rather than taking a pen from it, I feel it without looking at them.
And that
It's
tactile
like,
interpretation is the move? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just reminded, like, it's like a box full of potential, and just one small part of this like universe of different possibilities that could be actualized. Only one part of it is actually being then played, or not played, or just taken from this realm of potential and put into a different state. That was very abstract.
No, that's good. Like, I can highlight from there, like, this idea of a deck, and the deck is called potential. And this deck is, say it's put in a bag or a box or whatever container. It could be just separate words. It could be candy. It could be words and items, whatever it is. But that's the deck. And how the deck is used is that you put your hand in there and pick one thing. And that's what comes from the potential.
That could be even be like the title of the card. Like, it's a weird title, but
could be.
But I like the idea of what you had before, like, or I'm not sure if I understood it correctly, but like, whenever you play a card, you have to find something on that card to, like, to make this continuation. Like, here there is the box, we pick or we sense something in it and then use it, and like this move has to be applicable to every card we play. Or I'm not sure if I understood that correctly or not.
I mean, it doesn't matter if you understand it interestingly, then it's good. Like, I think it's that larger idea, like, in a way, like the cards from earlier, like this sort of the point or black point on the white space being captured, but then it had this idea that leads to activity where you're finding it from the environment. There's this sort of like a push towards generating something. And similarly with the text, there's this idea of writing the text anew or in a new form, which is also pushed towards generation. It doesn't have to be pushed towards generation, but I do think that rather than the card being meaning, which you just like read and passively interpret, it's actually like pushes an activity is an interesting one. Maybe not like everything has to be like that, but I think it's like a thing to encourage.
I like this idea of the pushing for an active interpretation or for an operational interpretation. I'm thinking that after this happens, maybe you have to eat the candy, and therefore it has a consequence, like you digest your move in a way that it also impacts you.
Yes.
Linda,
if you
yeah, go ahead.
No,
if you know that you're gonna eat it, you might have different interpretations of it, right?
Yes. Linda has a good idea, which I will kind of well, I will say what it brought to my mind, like and record it in a different move. Like, I will give the same source, this image, a title called trap, and then the activity is whenever you play this card, like, you figure out a trap that you're in. there could be something else, but I'll stop there. You figure out the trap that you're in, and yeah, you could potentially work yourself out of it, but maybe it's enough that you figure out the trap that you're in. So for example, now if I play this as a trap, I could say, well, I could say that I'm in a trap of language. And yeah, you figure out the trap that you're in and describe the trap. Like now that I'm currently in a trap of language, as I have been my whole life, most of my life probably. And this trap is that it's like a labyrinth trap. That it's like that my moves of whatever I think have to be following these corridors of this labyrinth, and it might be like a labyrinth that I never get out of. And that's one trap that I'm in. So this was my action towards figuring out the trap that I'm in and describing it.
Great. I'm silent because I'm taking notes, and there's a beautiful collaboration going on in the doc for the formatting.
That's good.
Yeah, this is amazing.
And it's an interesting possibility now, even opening here, is like, because then if this is a card of a trap, or I don't think the early ones have names, but like but whatever it is, then there is a possibility of making a deck of it, of course making a hand of it, making whatever card structure from it, but it opens up this idea of what could you do with, say, dealing yourself or dealing others, or randomly dealing a hand that has this trap, and it casts this sort of suggestion of certain kind of play that can come out of it. Like, for example, if it's this trap, then it makes you think and makes you express in a different manner. Like you're finding these traps. Like I'm in a trap of my home, and that is a trap because it is the one place that offers me warmth in a cold environment, or gives me the access to that, and therefore traps me.
I think I had an interesting thought, like the only one option how you can escape from the trap is playing the trap itself. Otherwise you're trapped.
Yeah, that's a good, actually that's brings out an interesting play. Somebody dropped. Well, interesting play. So in the branch where this is a trap, and taking Eva's idea of that the only way to escape the trap is to play, is that one thing that could be connected to this card of a trap is a story that I have or a parable that I have a rough sketch on, which is you know, Plato's cave, the metaphor of people watching things in the walls and so on, and then turning away from the reflections of the walls is a way to see a larger thing. I made a version of it, which is like where there's the main role of a person is a person walking in a labyrinth, but then the change is that you climb on top of the labyrinth or in the top walls, and you get this view of an architect. So there could be a way to play the trap and one of the moves you could make is to tell the parable. I'm not saying it's a good move, but just to give an example of like a different kind of thing that could come out of it.
I like that one too.
I think I would like a cardy move now.
Which one?
A cardy move, a move that a card can make. Such as like so. Now we've taken an image and we've kind of worked it into a potential card. So now I would like to do something with that card. I mean, as if move it or as if put something next to it. That's something that only a card can do.
Yeah.
So I thought that the mixing would kind of be funny also, you know, like when you take like a deck and you shuffle it. Which in itself is maybe not so much of a thing. It comes in out.
But if you think of the jar as the deck, a shuffle of the deck could be a shake of the jar, which has its own like randomizing qualities and like its own physicality, and it makes a specific sound. So I like this how do you say, like this translation of the deck, the jar, the hand, the cards, the suit, the color of the beans. Like it's really just a deck. The flavor,
That's
right?
actually a bit funny, like when you say with the like, so because then you take the shuffling as a acoustic event rather than, you know, kind of a rule dependent or rule oriented one or rule linked one. So like because what I kind of was trying to suggest was that as we have now kind of worked quote unquote inside this card or on this card, and I think this fractal inflection that you're making there, Pablo, is also really funny. But like the thought that one could go kind of work it now with the card, meaning like as it having some type of surrounding. So if we would now think of another card, and then maybe we have to still construct that, or we draw on our existing sets that we have done before. And then we would take those two, this one and that one, and then we would shuffle them as an acoustic event. So kind of think what this one now would bring, would already have brought by what we have now, you know, constructed into off it. And what would the other one potentially bring of sound? Obviously, I'm thinking of sonaring or so, but could also be other things. But I think so. Like what I would kind of like to throw into the group would be, how about we try to proceed to the edge of the card, of this card, and look for another card, and then see what we can do with multiple.
Yes.
Yes, another card would be interesting. I think so too.
I will change the card and we can pick one, but I'll introduce one more card in the kind of vein of Martin's thinking. I wrote it actually down as a move called move. That is, you do something with the card, which is like you can tell a move for it. And like to give this card one more, this trap card, one move is that play it by placing it in some location where people will encounter it. So, for example, place it on a table, in a common kitchen, or place it between pages of a book. So whenever people encounter it, it becomes the moment of thinking of the trap. But this then becomes a kind of a move that the card could play, as like not just playing it on the table, but playing it like anywhere to be kind of encountered. So that's one move of a move for this card. But to change here are some possibilities. For this one, the text is intentionally left to the image. I can pick more.
I picked last time, so someone else should do it, but these images are great.
Okay, if they're still great, like we can stay on this.
I'm kind of very drawn to the black dots on the white ground, the second one, where it is not centered.
Also
Yes.
me.
Okay, this was the switch move. Now we switch, but we can also include Martin's thought of mixing potentially this card with the earlier one. One doesn't have to follow that. It's not. It's one branch way, but we can walk other branch ways. So that's a possibility to remember. Any moves on this? Rules, deck suits, spreads, titles, hands, or moves for the cards themselves.
I would say this is a deck, and it's actually like a bird's eye view of a tower of candies from the jar on top of each other. A very tall tower, one perfectly placed on top of each other.
Could it then be like, if it's a deck and almost like a diagram of how to place deck potentially?
Yeah, could have like an indication of position, yeah.
So in a way, making of that deck is placing things on top of each other. And maybe the size of the deck is how many things you can place, which are not necessarily images, but could be other objects.
It could also be kind of a reminder, so to speak, that one can think of anything as a bird's eye view of a stack of a lot of other things. And the one thing that, I mean, if we would think that this dot would represent a card, we would be looking at the face of the card. But as Pablo suggested, there's a whole edge, you know, like a whole tower of edges to be looked at. So, and that's not usually the surface in the card that one plays very much with, that one uses at all, because it's so small comparatively. But if it's a kind of metaphor for saying that, like, we can think of everything as bird's eye views of some stuff. So what's the edge like? And is it a stack of many things, and we can see the edges?
Yeah, like the edge of a card, for example, but the edge of something else as well.
Yes, exactly. So here probably we would think that it would be a stack of cards or candies, which are cards. But we can think of other things as stacks of other things that have then edges. It's a bit tricky, but it's. I think it can be funny to climb into that
Yeah,
ladder.
Yeah, there's like several directions, like in terms of the edges, you could make a rule of like finding edges in things, which is like, of course, like I'll pick something like for the cell phone, the edge could be like the side of it, but it could also be edge in terms of an outline, like forming an outline. Like that's also edge-like, and that like that could lead to something to use the outline itself.
It could also, it wouldn't have to be a formal thing, like the edge wouldn't have to be a formal thing, but more like as a counterpoint to the face. So if I look at the shelf, which I actually do because I'm looking at library shelves here, so that would be the face of the thing for me. But now what's the edge of that I don't usually look at?
So discovering edges in a way.
Yes, kind of like rather almost kind of discovering the face. Yeah, Linda is saying it well. So first discovering the face, like as Pablo said, I see that this is a card, but actually it's a tower of many cards. So after discovering the face, you turn the thing and you see edges, not necessarily like a form, but also kind of aspects of it. I think aspects is the right word. Which are edge cases, so to speak, you know? They're just edges of the thing.
Okay, now I get you. Like, in a way,
like different interfaces of an entity.
Yes. There you
like,
go. Yes, aspect interfaces is good.
Like space is one interface, time is one interface, color is an interface, and there are so many more. Like it's like someone, I think it was Linda who mentioned something about infinity. Like I think there can be indefinite or n amount of interfaces, and like the card or this card is the hint that you're just looking at one of these interfaces.
Yeah.
To make an example of that, like you could think that if you play this card, like, and you pick up a word, but then you think that that is the face of the word, like, and how do you turn it into an edge? Does it mean that you like in some manner dig under the word, like all the connections that it has, how you go to dictionary description, but then you think of it like looking at it from another side, or something else? But
or you think of you take the sounds apart, for example.
Yeah.
You could think that the word is constructed also just from its sounds, and then you can push those back and forth.
Yeah, there's a good comment from Linda again, like that in a way the edge is kind of like the whole Plato's cave is an example of this, like only seeing the face, and then the turning is moving away from that face to see other sides of it in a way, or yeah, can be thought of that way.
Nice.
And also like the sounds, like you hear a sound of something, but then you one turning of it would be to turn your attention to the source of the sound, like and to like how the source of the sound creates the sound. Like car makes a noise, but then turning to the car and the tires that are the source of the sound, and the tires rolling over something is looking at the sound from not from the interface of hearing the sound, but from the kind of edges of it.
Yeah, yeah, or like how, like for example, if you speak of a speaker or you know, like a audio device, like that would be the face of the thing, but that also to think of it as an architecture, like an architectural structure. You know, like the speaker, how it is built. That's kind of a, you know, then you've seen the speaker, right? Like not the box, but the thing itself that vibrates with the magnet and so stuff. So you look at that as an architecture structure. That's a kind of, I think, an edge of the same, like in the way that like the edges support the face, right? So that could maybe be a way into like explaining what I mean, what we mean when we speak about edge in this case.
And this is the same, but conceptually, this is the same thing that.
Just to add one move, which is possible with this, is like one move could be, and this fits with many cards, is like you create a new card that is the same card. Like for example, somebody could create a snap a picture of a speaker. If they kind of went through Martin's route in itself, and then it's another card of the same card in itself, like this face edge.
Like forking.
Yes.
It could be titled The Fork. I like this idea.
Mm-hmm.
Or I like the act of forking in the sense of there is a series of events, or not necessarily events, there's a series of different entities strung together in a line, and then something happens, and then you fork. And then you have again like this series of whatever it is. Because it opens up like an immense, like, again, there's like this infinite number of possibilities that are kind of opened up.
Mm.
Can I add to that? Oh, sorry.
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Is everybody familiar with the image of a patch bay or kind of node-based, how do you call it, procedural design, like in Blender, for example, procedural modeling or procedural texturing?
Yeah, like node-based, rule-based.
Node-based, exactly.
Yep.
So I'm very close to Linda, what you were just saying, like if you think in music, you have, for example, a module in synthesizers, or not in synthesizers maybe, but in kind of, like, I'm not super firm with this vocabulary, but like there's this thing called the low frequency oscillator. And that thing does exactly what it does. It produces low frequencies, like sound waves. So you can plug in a patch cable into where that low frequency signal is coming out. It's an electric vibration, but you don't have to put it into a speaker to have acoustic output. You can use it as a control for another type of, another instrument. So kind of, in a sense, what we could also think of with these cards, and maybe then we get a new image that is not really any more cards, but it's really, I think we can maybe embed it in the cards still, but we can also maybe think of another image, is that these are all kind of multidimensional generators of sorts, whose, any amounts of outputs we can patch back into other, modules of other generators in very kind of non-prescripted ways. Like Pablo said, like you use the card onto itself just earlier. I'm not now able, Pablo, to recount the example that you made, but But that I think could be a very interesting imagery, because kind of it allows for something. It's some, if you allow that I go for 1 second a little bit meta, it allows for the kind of somewhat kind of coherent, cohesive production, so to speak, of modules, like as if something that has a plastic skin or a container in which it is kind of packed together that has certain outputs. But then it's kind of cross-threading by these patch cables in very like in ways that kind of can cut through these modules in ways that were maybe not thought of in their original, so to speak, creation. You see what I'm trying to say? So you get the opportunity to make a closed thing, which is always good for mental, capacity to handle. But you can patch it, back into itself, make a, feedback loop, patch it across something that wasn't meant to be patched that way. So maybe I want to suggest that idea, or ask about what you think about that.
I think that this quality, being able to do that, is precisely in this idea of how everything is filter-like. Like filter has this quality of precisely modifying something rather than being the object itself. And I mean, this is one of the reasons why I think the idea of seeing things as filters is important. And of course, it's not the only way to name it, but it's like, it's really what's happening there is because there is this sort of possibility of thinking of it as a filter of something, like just like you have this one oscillation, and rather than it being sound, it takes in a sound, and then that sound will have that oscillation because it's more like functioning like a filter. And to turn this to a move, I'll take Eva's idea of fork as a card, and I make a card, let's call it fork filter. And the fork filter is whenever you get a card, you find another card that becomes that card in itself. So for example, this was called, there was face and edges. We didn't quite give it a title, but doesn't matter. But like where we started from slightly earlier, maybe it's edges of an interface where inter is written in brackets, but whatever it is. But then if we play the fork card or fork filter with it, our task is to find another card that becomes edges of an interface. Maybe with some additions to it. To give an example, I could take this and now fork this to edges of an interface. But then I add edges of an interface in parentheses knowledge. So now this card becomes edges of an interface knowledge, which then brings me to the idea of this, like these impressions of this complicated, very designed and very like rigorous patterning, and then someone young on the front of it, and that being the face of knowledge. And then there's one door open, which is kind of an edge, but takes into the knowledge itself. So I forked the edges of an interface card and brought it to this card in itself. Hopefully that was somewhat understandable. Like the fork filter was to take the idea of the earlier card, and then the rule was to bring it to some something else and like impose that meaning to something else, like this image becoming that card. It's just sort of an interface knowledge.
I wonder if you can build on the idea or on the prompt of knowledge. Like now we entered a new path. Like I don't have a fixed idea. I'm just talking out loud what my thoughts are. Like there is this ideal of the pursuit of knowledge, of the one who is seeking, like going through space and time in order to find the truth, to look for, or that being the quest. Maybe it's going into it, like maybe movement, or I don't know. What else comes to mind? It's like just, yeah, I somehow have the image of a seeker in mind. I mean, it even matches the image.
Yeah, there is, to continue these impressions, there's an interesting juxtaposition, which is that there is the seeker, which is clearly young, but then on the left side of it, there is carved on a stone, very similar figure, but now a stone edifice. Like if you can see it on the left, I don't know if you can see my mouse cursor. Which I don't yet have an exact idea of what to do with, but it's an interesting like expansion to the seeker, that the seeker is moving, but then it's also like recorded into the thing that it's seeking or seeking from.
It's as a kind of like a scale or a gradient. Like in the beginning, someone is a seeker, and the longer there's no point of finding the absolute truth. There is no end point, but still, like the longer it takes, the more input one gets. So like while being a seeker, it implies to kind of go down that road and evolve and becoming, I mean, like the very silly term is becoming a finder, or becoming like, and although I'm not sure if that's even true, like just because you're seeking, it doesn't mean that you also find something.
Yeah, maybe the point is the seeking, which leads to finding, but not necessarily. But the point focuses on the seeking.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I will like draftily call these moves that me and Eva are now making descriptors or descriptions, which is kind of describing something to create more sources on the sources. We don't have to follow that, but that was just an idea. But then to continue with one more description move, like continuing from what Eva was saying and I was saying, this is a very micro story. There's a reading of this card, Edges of an Interface Knowledge, where there is two doors. One of them is open. In front of it stands a living figure, possibly about to enter the door. And on the other side, there is a closed door where there's a recording of the seeker into the record. And some read it as the seeker on an open door is a beginning, and the seeker recorded on a stone is the eventual end, because everything that starts ends somehow, somewhere. And even if there is no other knowledge, there's at least the seeking that leaves something in the record.
I'm thinking of the. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking of the slots that open up or that these operations imply. So, for example, you now made evident a narrative going through one door, coming out through the other. There's implied also an inside and an outside. There's passage of time. So I'm thinking how these descriptions generate or point towards additional operations and how those can be pursued or ignored.
Eva, were you thinking of making a move? Like,
No, I was just about to point out that like there's some duality involved in this image. Like now probably you said like the inside and the outside. It's also like the two doors. It's about like I see it on one hand as a like almost as a vector, like the seeker, there's a starting point and then it starts rolling, which is eventually a vector. And how at the same time we described this or you, Pekka, were talking about the juxtaposition, like two different states while having this vector. And again, I'm just thinking out loud, like analyzing the structure of the card, which is we are trying to describe.
yeah, there's this interesting quality of vectors, which is that they do have a beginning and an end, if you look at in maths. But on the other hand, they don't have an end because they provide a direction. Like if you draw them on a plane, you put a beginning and an end, like there's an arrow. And on the other hand, it's not so much about the beginning and an end, it's more about that with the beginning and an end becomes an arrow, which is a direction, which it's like a force, essentially. So like some read it, I'm adding to the story, that the two doors are called beginning and an end, but then the living figure reminds that the beginning and end are both, yes, a clear beginning and a clear end, but also a vector that is like a moving force that was able to create the beginning, began something, and led to an end of something. So some call this living figure a vector.
I find it a very interesting thought experiment of considering living figures as vectors, because like there's like a very clear beginning of it might be like the moment when someone is oh god, I'm liking the term in English, like you can, or okay, maybe the birth, another point of, or like a mark where something begins, and there is a trajectory, and like life is evolving into that direction out, and that's some it again, but yeah, again, I'm not sure if that relates to that game, but at the same time I find like I really like the idea of vectors now as we talk about that. I find it very interesting. And also like what if you more in mathematical terms, like if you have two vectors that kind of will intersect, then like the trajectories, they will change, and like having an n-dimensional space with n vectors in it, it's again like this field of different forces kind of moving through the plane and then kind of interacting with each other.
Yeah, in some ways, like it's very, in a way, fertile branch of thought to think about living figures as vectors, because they are, in one way, they are forms. Like you can see a person, and it's a form, but it's also a vector because that person is always moving, changing, going somewhere, um, um, changing itself. So it has the same dichotomy of being a thing, like precisely there, but also moving, having a direction or multiple directions. So that it has this idea. And in relation to this sort of expansion of cards, I could see to this card, which is born out of an earlier card and then fork filtered to be this card. I can see this, like there is actually a kind of micro book connected to it, which is simply stories of some think or some say of what the card is, which is not the only thing. There could be, of course, rules of action and so on, but there is this, like some say, that the interface here, which is this face of knowledge, is like made to be intricate, partly because of the like the more intricate an interface is, the more hypnotic it is, the more it kind of tries to capture you in it, which is kind of the face of knowledge, just like words on a page of a book is similar to this, like the face of this thing where the door is. So that's one fragment that would be in this book, the micro book that connected to this card.
This card really became an universe. I'm imagining we are deriving all of this information from the intricacies of these Baroque patterns. And the closer you get, you can focus on one thing and extract some of this information. If you look at it from afar, you can see a larger narrative, but even if you zoom in, there's just as much detail. So I'm thinking all of this derived from the same architecture interface, conveying the knowledge it holds.
I have one move to add to it. It's a move type called ritual. And there is a prayer to this card. So when you play, there is a particular type of a prayer that you do. And that prayer is whenever you place this card and you take one thing, which might be a text, might be even making food, might be anything, but you play through it as if a prayer, like the making of the food has a beginning and then venturing in and it has an end. Maybe reading the text or whatever you do with the text is similarly has a beginning and an end, but you perform it like a prayer. And it's a prayer of now potentially an imaginary religion, which has this card in it as one of its rituals, with all the things said about it included. One more addition. This type of a prayer actually has a deck to it. And how it's done is like you shuffle and deal one card which might be this card, from the deck, and then whatever the card gives you the prayer that you do.
I really like the players as they imply or suggest the possibility of a deity associated with them. Maybe they are conjuring a more powerful force into action. So the operational quality of the prayers are sort of applied at the divine level, like it's something you're asking for rather than something you're doing, but the desire of action is still there, with more of like this grandiose consequences of its of when it happens.
As a metamorph, as a comment, I think it's interesting to highlight how this particular card works really like a seed, that it's growing now. There's partially visible, partially even continuing beyond what has been said, like a whole religion, which one can imagine practices and so on. And what does this kind of quality of generation imply for playing with cards in this kind of a card fashion? Martin, you sent links to images. Were you thinking of proposing something through them or making a move through them?
I was still kind of backlogging on the patch filter. Just wanted to kind of etch that a little bit into the record of today. I have, like, at least for myself, I had to do that. Like, these are just like a bit not really the good images yet, but like a couple of where devices of other sorts are patched together with devices of other sorts, just to, you know, to show the kind of heterogeneous, hopefully heterogeneous capacity of cross patching. Mm-hmm. But it's you're already kind of 5 steps somewhere else, so I'm lagging behind.
Well, let's, since we started late, I think we're nearing closure, but let's open it up to anybody to make a move. Linda has a good expression again. Customize your god, a card where you can compose your bespoke religion according to your secret vices and untellable sins. The goal is to be absolved into and gain an access to salvation, which is a good idea. To add to it, in this religion, there could be this very large deck, maybe without limit, maybe the deck keeps on growing, and that's the god. But then from that deck, everyone makes their own deck. which is smaller, by selecting, which then becomes their god, but they might change their deck in order to reflect the change of their god. It could also be God in quotation marks. It's a functional God, a game of God.
Just on a side note, I'm wondering like how we ended up with the theme of God and religion and so on. And like my point is, I wonder how much are we influenced by the image itself compared to where we started the discussion, because like it's apparently like a goth or like some sort of church architecture that we are looking at. And I just wonder how much we are spoiled and influenced by this imagery.
I think there are some, well, it's a very hard area to study, but there are some texts about this. I remember myself reading a text on peripatetic philosophy, which is the philosophy while walking around, as per described in Plato's books, and it was, let's say, speculating on this, like how much the environment of the walk affected the topics at hand, and even kind of underlining passages where you could kind of see the effect. But beyond that, I could say that it is an effect, having played other games or game-like structures where a similar quality is present, that there is like, in a way, you come to something by a kind of focus or perspective, how you're looking at it. But then usually, quite often at least, the things that are beyond that perspective start to bleed over. So if this image wouldn't have had the religious connotations, we might not be here. And it's I mean, one could think of it as a spoilage, but like, especially thinking religions creatively, I don't think it's necessarily spoilage. No, I cannot. Sorry, Martin, I cannot remember the name of I can think about it, but I don't remember it offhand. I have just vague memory of reading it, but I can try to figure it out. But yeah, like in a way, like being creative with religions is like you can almost like rub off the fervent belief part and keep the practices part. And I think religion is interesting as a topic, as a possibility.
But I like that, Eva, your comment, and we have spoken about this earlier before, and I think the role of whatever source material is there. Like now we use images, we have used many images before. We also we're on Zoom, we look at the computer, we're in a particular way, and then we had this week in Haimio, and it's mega. Like personally, I have not written a paper on peripatetic philosophy, but I personally think as a designer also, it's mega influential. But that's not the thing, because you were not looking for, I mean, it's not a thing, of course it's a thing, but that's exactly the point. I mean, we're not looking necessarily for absolutes in a kind of variant of what you just said, Bekro, like in the practice is something to be found. And I think in the concreteness of the kind of suggestions that go through these sessions here, they don't need to be neutral, they don't need to be absolute. And I'm not saying it, but that you were suggesting that, like, maybe just kind of to, spill it through the conversation at all. I think it's a bit kind of funny to kind of start talking like that now happened about religion in a manner in which that's not the last point of discussion, but that's like one element in a play. And I think that's so good. That's so good. Then basically you have reversed the hierarchies, you know, kind of crushed the hierarchies. It's such funny, you know, manner.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and it's almost like experiencing the religion as if you're exploring a very large building, and then you saw the religion while walking past a doorway. Like it's in the structure rather than the end point.
Yeah, and I mean that's one of the things that we've kind of thought about the cards already in the beginning, is that one thing that they allow is to have very, you know, if you depart from a kind of hierarchical architecture of meaning or so, to have very large elements sit just side by side with the tiniest ones and still make sense and still play. And
Yes.
that's funny that you can have a card customize your god next to a thing where you have where we look at kind of, I don't know, a black dot on a paper and think it's a stack or so. I think it's so nice, this kind of composability of this.
That's another very good point, that it kind of creates this possibility of how, you know, very large points and very small points, like the small and large being very general terms here, but things that don't normally associate can all come to a medium where they can not just associate but crossbreed. Like they're not anymore in this belongs here and it never goes with this, but it's rather we can bring these things that are normally separate into a medium where they interact. While waiting for Linda's sentence, what did you mean by what do you think about? Oh, this is now the sentence comes. What do you see in your mind? I probably see light, which is hilarious. Oh, how we can see religion. Yeah. Oh, you mean like when you see religion, what do you see in your mind? Which could be a card also. This is like whatever you pick, you see it in your mind. And it could be religion, or it could be casserole, or it could be someone's mother, whatever it is. But it's about what do you see in your mind, and then describe what you see in your mind.
But that's another very interesting thing. What we are doing right now is like we change our methodology. Like before we had an image, and then we constructed everything around it, and now we can do it the opposite way. We have kind of cards, and now we create the image, or we create like how that card looks like, and the card is you saw the religion.
Yes,
that's super interesting.
And it's totally possible. Like you can start, like in a way, it's almost starting with the idea of card. And one of the reasons why I wanted in this material to be text was like a poor way of, well, images are easy, but at least have something that is different to point out how the card approach works there. And then, of course, the idea being that really anything works. Like it could be if you're standing on a street, it can be the street itself or the environment, and that's the card. And like Eva said, it doesn't have to start from the sense thing, whatever the card is. It could start with the idea, and then the card creates the sense thing, or it can be both. But these are all possibilities.
I think it's a good point though what Eva is saying, this kind of, not though, I'm not kind of contradicting anybody here, but like just to kind of pick up on that, to kind of carry a bit with us, or not a bit, but carry with us kind of the materiality that we mobilize. Like, you know, now we go from text. I'd also kind of maybe think, as I already right earlier about the actual tool set that we base our working together here on. Like you know, who has the ability to manipulate an image, this chat situation. Like, so I think that's all. That's worth, I think, just kind of a closer look, and or not just a closer look as a limited in time type of thing, but as a kind of dimension to begin really kind of carrying along with us. What is it that we base this all on? Yeah. Just.
Yeah, essentially everything affects, like everything is a component of play, including this kind of structures, and of course they can be changed as well. Like that's like nothing is not affecting in a way. Like
yeah, precisely. This kind of non-neutrality, like that's not a detriment. It doesn't kind of, as we said earlier, it doesn't take away from anything, but it's not. It goes with, so to speak.
I mean, of course, in this situation, many of these things come from kind of just practicalities, like how it's hard to do everybody's screen sharing, and also like, but like, of course, these can be changed by intentionally like preparing for them, and like that's a change that definitely would be interesting to explore. But as kind of like as we're running in time, as a kind of thoughts on like an overview thoughts, I could, from my side, I could think of this as kind of exploration. Like that was kind of the idea that these very vague drafted moves are kind of urging exploration around this card idea. And afterwards, or even starting from now, like one can think of like these different branches of exploration, because they opened up underneath them many ideas, from like very different rules and practices to different cards, to also what can be generated with the cards. Like every situation of play, every thing created from the moves had like different implications. And thinking about these implications like one after another, they all kind of also imply different kind of possibilities. Like for me, like making the move of ritual opened this possibility of, well, religion is kind of like a game. It's like the holy book is the book of rules, and but then that opens up this possibility of like what can you use from there, that area in itself, and then how it connects with these cards. Like if this card is a prayer, or there is a deck where this card is, and then dealing a card from the deck and doing the ritual from it is the prayer. What else builds around that, or could be built around that? One doesn't have to follow that, but it opens up this sort of doorways of possibilities. But then the other examples opened up different possibilities from this to scroll this and the different pathways we took. And I think these explorations could be kind of noted in terms of like interesting areas that come from them, and thinking about those interesting areas and what could they mean in terms of expressing the possibilities from this kind of approach to cards. So if this was exploring possibilities, then a kind of post thought could be what of these possibilities like have interesting reflections, implications, and how could they be expressed?
Let's have a peripatetic session once.
Yes, we we should work towards it and have. We can try to simulate or create a peripatetia, which is remotely, but we should definitely aim for natively peripatetic while being in the same place.
Yes.
But what is your like final thoughts? I think this, for me, this is underlining that there's a lot of potential here. Like the fact that the explorations are leading to fertile places. It's kind of like that you landed on an unknown ground and then you start walking around and then you find something promising. Oh, there is a nice grove here, and oh, that soil is rich. It's a good sign that that place in itself is rich in its possibilities. And that's kind of one of my takes on this. But what about you all? What's your sense?
I love it. I love it. These spaces of exploration and the ideas that come out of it. My pragmatic mind is hoping that we get to capture this into an actionable, operational item, probably through the cards, like the database of cards and the website where cards can be played. I would really like that to sort of like these sessions, these play sessions, to permeate onto that onto that infrastructure for supporting these play times and expanding them, and of course sharing them with others.
Yeah, really, like I think the cards suggest ways to play them, and they also suggest other cards and other card types, other card approaches, which makes the cards maybe a good way, almost like creating this exploration, like expanding the space, and then one can kind of record from there, like mark a spot to explore or to communicate to others as ways to start to approach this expressing to others, this kind of play. And I would also highlight that there are many tarotic qualities to this. But this is way more richer than tarot. I mean, it doesn't have to be think of as competition, but it's kind of like has those kind of qualities, but it's not nowhere near to being only that. And that is also like interesting comparison. Like it's well, one perspective towards it. It's like people often associate with tarot this sort of deepness and contemplation. This is kind of doing all of that, but also like in a more expanded sense. But could also actually, one area of development is to kind of steal qualities from tarots. Is like, yes, one settles that this card is, I don't remember if we named this, but maybe it's grabbing the cards or whatever it's called. But then this could be a card that is returned again and again and maybe expanded on its meaning. That's one practice approach, kind of tarot-like, that might be useful in some cases. Any other thoughts? Reflection?
So we, or maybe this is after the record, just kind of process-based, but maybe it's in the record. Pablo, what do you think about kind of time second slot for us?
It's time second slot.
Quickly talk about it.
Yeah, we could have let's have like a final moment if somebody else has reflections, and then we can stop the recording and say that.
Yes.
Any reflections on the play and its impressions?
I mean, I love these sessions. Like that's the best part of it. So I find it like, and I find them so interesting because exactly like it makes me want to break things and pull things apart and question things. And like this is what I think you all described as very like rich, and I feel that too. So
yeah, it's kind of like how these game structures can behave like knives and saws, but maybe also screwdrivers, but essentially ways to take existing things apart, like the seams and locks and screws bolting down what is thought of as reality. But the game structure kind of allows like, oh, now I can peer this off, and I can not only peer it off but put it in another place. And I think that's a kind of a quality which is very powerful in itself. And I think this card and this approach to cards is very much in that quality. This being able to pry apart and replace or place in a different position things that are normally just unmovable.
As a reflection, I want to really underline that point that you just made, Beckcom. I've come across this now multiple times in the past, even weeks. The significance of having pathways to not seek escape, seek revolution, seek unknowing, seek undoing, but to do that in a kind of compositional way in other and new structures, and like independent structures. I mean, I didn't say independent, I said independent structures, like inside of dependent structures, taking religion as a play toy and puzzle, because I think like, yeah, there's something so a little bit like dispiriting about this idea of unknowing, as a kind of act, as if that was possible, and the romanticism kind of, but like this kind of way of working with, sadly, yes, we do know, but like also by way of that we can know forward, like other things. Not forward, it's not a progress thing, it's a compositional thing. I think that's really
constructional.
Yes, collage and yeah, I really appreciate that approach. Yeah, I think taking that, giving respect to that by also in a material sense is really going to, I think, do a lot.
Strongly agreed, and that is also a good point to stop the recording, because I think the way you put it, Martin, is a good final thought. And so I will do exactly that.